Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Eakes or Miss Eakes, and this is Mortuary Anatomy 1. We meet at 8 a.m. on Tuesdays. So, anatomy, which is what we're going to be learning in my class this fall, is one of the major areas of scientific study required of mortuary science students, and the material learned here serves as an important base of knowledge for the understanding and learning of additional coursework in areas such as pathology, embalming, restorative art, and microbiology, which is what we're going to be learning next fall. So this is the foundation for that. As funeral service professionals, there will be times when we have to deal directly or indirectly with other members of allied health professions, such as doctors, nursing personnel, and medical technicians. And we have to have an understanding of basic anatomical terminology so that we can effectively communicate with these personnel and with these other professionals, as well as the families we serve. By the time you finish mortuary anatomy, you'll be familiar with the various body systems and you'll have a better understanding of the relationship between structure and function of the human body. This knowledge allows us to foster the development of healthful living habits as a result of being more aware of the intricate nature of our own bodies. Today, we're going to be discussing the human organism and the various functions that occur inside of it. We'll begin to learn anatomical terminology and familiarize ourselves with general body regions, body cavities, and the body plan. So before we begin studying the living body, I want to remind everyone that in funeral services, we're going to be in contact with the dead. And I want to talk about a concept known as reverence for the dead. As funeral service professionals, we have to maintain a sense of decorum, which is what we call reverence or respect for the dead. So you're going to hear terms as the body or a corpse or a cadaver. And there's a significant difference between the term corpse and the term cadaver. A corpse is the word that we use for a dead human body. And a cadaver is a dead body that's been donated to science for scientific purposes, like dissection. But as funeral professionals, we wouldn't use either of these words to describe someone's loved one when we place them on our embalming table. There has to be specific written permission from the immediate family for dead human remains to be used as cadavers. And we obtain authorization to embalm, but this doesn't give us the right to use a deceased person as a cadaver. Dissection of the deceased, by which I mean any cut that's not necessary for embalming, is considered mutilation of a body and can result in criminal and civil action. So funeral service is not all science and terminology. We incorporate our knowledge of human anatomy with the chemistry of embalming, but it's more than that. Embalming is a mixture of science and art, and it has a great significance in the rituals that we as humans participate in. Funeral service involves emotion. And as we study anatomy, it's important to remember that the decedents we care for are more than a corpse. That body was once someone's grandmother, their mother or father, their husband or wife or partner. Our goals are to serve the survivors, to carry out the final rites and disposition of the deceased, to protect ourselves and the public from disease-causing microorganisms, and to gain a better understanding of our own bodies. We will achieve this through our studies so that we can speak authoritatively with the public officials, health professionals, and the families that we serve. So let's get started. Anatomy is an ancient science, and many of the words used to describe the body are derived from Old Latin and Greek languages. The word anatomy comes from the Greek language meaning throughout and to cut. In other words, the body has been scientifically studied over hundreds of years through dissection in order to understand structure and function. The word anatomy is defined as the study of the structure of the body, and physiology is the study of the functions. Anatomy and physiology are intertwined because a structure is generally designed to serve a particular function. Each organ of the body is built to perform that function, such as the brain. The brain is shaped the way it is. It's designed that way because of the functions that it has to perform. So, anatomy and physiology cannot really be studied separately. Anatomy is such a broad science that we have to break it down into subdivisions. We have gross anatomy, which is the study of the body with the unaided eye, meaning we don't have to use a microscope. Um, One way to remember this is that when we have something on the table and we're studying it, you could say, I can smell it and it's gross. You don't have to have a microscope to find that out. We also have microscopic anatomy, which is using a microscope, and this is further subdivided into cytology, which is the study of cells, and histology, the study of tissues. Then we have systemic anatomy, which is studying specific body systems, regional anatomy, and looking at specific body regions, such as the head or the thorax or the pelvic region or the abdomen. And then we have pathological or abnormal anatomy or pathology, which is structural changes from disease. We have topographical anatomy, which is looking at surfaces. We're going to touch on that today as well. And we have physiological anatomy, which is the function of the body parts and how they work. And developmental anatomy, also known as embryology, which is the study of structures before birth. The body is organized into structural levels, beginning at the chemical level. And the chemical level includes all of the atoms and molecules that come together to form the various chemical substances necessary to maintain life as we know it. And we'll talk about this next week when we talk about the chemistry of life. The next level is going to be the cellular level. And the cell is the smallest functional unit of the body, and it's said to possess the somewhat magical qualities of life, like the ability to respond to a stimulus, the ability to take in food and water, the ability to give off waste products, to grow and mature, and the ability to reproduce. And that's going to be covered in the third week. As similar cells are arranged for the performance of a particular function, the next structural level is formed, and that's the tissues. There's four basic tissues of the body that we're going to talk about, and it's epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, connective tissue, and nervous tissue. Tissues combine to form organs, organs combine to form organ systems, and all of the organ systems combine to form the organism. We're going to cover 11 body systems: integumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine. We're going to separate the circulatory system into two. We're going to study the cardiovascular, the heart and blood vessels, and the lymphatic system, which is our immune system. And then the respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive. So let's do a basic overview of each of these body systems. First, we have the integumentary system, which is the skin and its components, such as hair, skin, nails, and sweat glands. These are all involved in covering and protecting the body as a whole, as well as functions such as temperature regulation and acting as a sensory organ. The integumentary system also helps to prevent water loss and helps produce vitamin D. The skeletal system includes the bones, cartilage, and ligaments that provide us support and protection to the body. The components of the skeletal system allow movement, it produces blood cells, stores minerals, and has energy storage. Then we have the muscular system, which is all of the body's muscles concerned primarily with movement of body parts. This allows us to maintain posture and produce body heat. The lymphatic system includes the lymph nodes and lymphatic organs that comprise our immune system. It's technically part of the overall circulatory system, and it works with the cardiovascular system. It removes foreign substances from blood and lymph and combats disease. The respiratory system is the lungs and other organs concerned with taking in oxygen and the elimination of other respiratory gases. It exchanges oxygen for carbon dioxide between blood and the air and regulates blood pH levels. The digestive system is the various organs concerned with taking in food products, breaking them down so the nutrients can be absorbed, and the elimination of solid waste products. And this is going to include the mouth, esophagus, stomach, large and small intestines, and the accessory organs like the liver and gallbladder and pancreas. The nervous system is the brain, spinal cord, and nerves, which have overall control over bodily functions and serve to coordinate the performance of tasks by various cells, tissues, and organs of the body. It controls physiological processes as well as intellectual function. The endocrine system is the group of glands that give off secretions which serve as chemical regulators of various bodily function. The endocrine system influences metabolism, growth, reproduction, and other functions involving the release and regulation of hormones. The cardiovascular system includes the heart, blood, and blood vessels serving to transport gases, nutrients, and waste products throughout the body. And then we have the urinary system, which is the kidney and other related organs that serve to clean waste products from the blood and maintain proper fluid and chemical balances within the body. And last but not least, we have the reproductive system. And in the female reproductive system, it produces oocytes and is the site of fertilization and fetal development. This consists of the ovaries, uterine tubes, uterus, vagina, mammary glands, and associated structures. And then we have the male reproductive system, which produces and transfers sperm cells to the female and produces hormones that influence sexual functions and behaviors. And of course, the male reproductive system consists of the testes, penis, and accessory structures. So all of these body systems correspond with each other and maintain a stable internal environment. And that's going to be the process of homeostasis. Homeostasis is a self-regulating process by which biological systems maintain stability while adjusting to changing external conditions. It's primarily controlled by the nervous and endocrine systems working together to achieve a steady internal environment. So the nervous system will detect changes and send nerve impulses to counteract disruption. An example of this is, say, a spider crawls on your leg. Sensory receptors are going to pick up that something is there, and as a reflex, you're going to kick your leg. The endocrine system works a little slower than the nervous system. It's going to respond by secreting hormones into the blood. An example of this is like regulating blood sugar. Nerve impulses are going to be your rapid changes, and hormones are going to work a little more slowly. I've heard it said before that nerve impulses are kind of like text messages, they're very quick, and hormones maybe more like an email. It takes a little bit longer to get. And in order to maintain homeostasis, we have what's called feedback systems, and there's positive and negative feedback systems. For a negative feedback system, you want the response to reverse the original stimulus. Um, so maintenance of homeostasis involves negative feedback loops, and these loops act to oppose a stimulus that triggers them. So if your body temperature is too high, say you're working out, it's summer, and you're getting a little overheated, a negative feedback loop will act to bring your internal temperature back down to a set point or a target value. So that's going to be like if you're hot and you start to sweat, that's a negative feedback system. The same goes for if you're cold, your body will shiver, it'll produce some movement with the muscular system to produce a little more body heat, and you bring your internal temperature back to that set target point. which is typically 98.6, but not for everyone. A positive feedback system is when a response enhances the original stimulus. A positive feedback system amplifies the starting signal, so they're usually found in processes that have to be pushed to completion, not when the status quo needs to be maintained. So, an example of this is during childbirth. During childbirth, the baby's head presses on the cervix, and the bottom of the uterus, which is where the baby has to emerge into the world, activates neurons to the brain. The neurons send a signal that lead to the release of a hormone known as oxytocin from the pituitary gland. And oxytocin increases those uterine contractions, puts pressure on the cervix, and this causes the release of even more oxytocin to produce even stronger contractions. And it's going to continue this positive feedback loop of enhancing that original stimulus. It's going to continue until that baby is born. So that's an example of positive feedback. So we have to maintain homeostasis in the body. If you have a disruption of homeostasis, it can lead to diseases or disorders or even death. So we have a couple of terms here that I want us to start getting familiar with. A disorder is any abnormality of structure or function. A disease is a more specific term for an illness. It has a recognizable set of signs and symptoms, and there's different types of diseases. There's local diseases that will affect only one part or a limited region of the body. A systemic disease that affects the entire body or several parts. And then we have some signs and symptoms. So a symptom can't be seen by an observer. This is going to be like a nausea or a headache. I can't look at someone and see that they're nauseous. Signs can be observed or measured, such as a fever or a rash. So we can take someone's temperature and observe that. We can see a rash. Anything that can be observed is going to be a sign. All right, so now we're moving into some anatomical terminology. And anytime we discuss any of these terms, we're going to be referring to a body in anatomical position. So anatomical position is a standardized method of observing the body that allows precise and consistent anatomical references. This is a person standing facing forward with legs parallel to one another. The upper limbs or arms hang at either side of the body with the palms facing forward. If the person is lying down, we have two different reclining terms that we need to know. If they're lying face down, it's the prone position, and if they're lying face up, it's going to be supine position. So generally, as embalmers, we're going to be having somebody in supine position when we're embalming them, but we're still going to refer to these terms as if that person were in anatomical position. So here's our terms of reference. We have anterior, or also known as ventral, and that's going to be towards the front of the body. And then we have posterior or dorsal. That's going to be towards the back of the body. So you can remember dorsal by thinking of the dorsal fin on a shark. That's going to be on the back of the shark, right? Then we have medial versus lateral. Medial is going towards the midline of the body, and lateral would be going towards the side or away from the midline. Proximal means it's nearer to the point of attachment. So my elbow is proximal to my wrist because it's closer to the point of attachment at my shoulder, my pectoral girdle here. And distal means further away from the point of attachment. So my wrist is distal to my elbow because my wrist is further away from my shoulder. We have internal, which means towards the inside of the body, or external, which means towards the outside. Superficial versus deep is going to be very similar to this. Ipsilateral means on the same side of the body, and contralateral means opposite sides of the body. For example, your kidneys, they're on opposite sides. Parietal means, or we're referring to body walls when we say the term parietal, and visceral means it's pertaining to the body organs. And then peripheral or central, we're kind of talking about vision here. So if you're looking straight ahead, your peripheral vision is everything to the side, and central is within your line of vision. So we'll go over this in class as well. We went over this with better examples. It's kind of hard to do it over this PowerPoint presentation. So we have body planes, and this it's imaginary lines dividing the body into different parts. Excuse me, I had a hiccup. So we have a frontal or coronal plane, which is going to divide the body into front and back portions. It's a vertical plane. The other vertical planes we have are a sagittal plane or a mid-sagittal or median plane. So a sagittal plane is going to divide the body into left and right portions, but it doesn't have to be right down the midpoint of the body. That's going to be the median plane or the mid-sagittal. And those are all of our vertical body planes. We also have a horizontal body plane that's called the transverse plane that separates the body into lower and upper portions. So let's talk about our general body plan. Our bodies exhibit bilateral symmetry in that if you were to divide our body into two sections, say we took that vertical mid-sagittal plane, cut right down the middle of the body, each side of the body is still going to resemble the other in size, shape, and position. And we have body regions and body cavities that we're going to talk about. So this is our general body plan. The general regions include the head, which includes the cranium and the face. We have the cervical region, which is the neck, and it connects the head to the trunk. The trunk is the part of the body to which the upper and lower limbs are attached. So that's your arms and legs. And in the trunk, we have the thorax, which is the chest, the abdomen, which is between the diaphragm and the pelvis. And we have the pelvis, which includes the hips, the sacrum, and the coccyx. And then we have extremities, which are your limbs. So 2 upper limbs, 2 lower limbs. Body cavities are spaces within your body that protect and support internal organs and isolate them from one another. We have a cranial cavity formed by cranial bones, and it contains the brain. We have a vertebral canal or a spinal canal formed by the bones of the vertebral column, and it contains the spinal cord. The thoracic cavity contains 2 pleural cavities that hold each lung, and the mediastinum, which includes the pericardial cavity that surrounds the heart. The mediastinum is located between the lungs and extends from the sternum to the vertebral column. Generally located between the first rib to the diaphragm, and it contains all the thoracic organs except for the lungs. The thoracic cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity is going to be separated by a structure or a muscle called the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a parachute-shaped muscle that separates these body cavities. The abdominopelvic cavity is divided into the superior abdominal and the inferior pelvic cavity. So the viscera in the abdominal cavity is going to be the stomach, spleen, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, small intestine, and most of the large intestine. And then we have the pelvic cavity, which is the lower inferior part. It's going to hold portions of the large intestine, the urinary bladder, and the reproductive organs. And within all of these body cavities, we're going to have serous membranes. So serous membranes are thin, slippery membranes that cover the viscera, within the thoracic and abdominal cavities and also lines the walls of the thorax and the abdomen. So there's different parts of the serous membrane. The first is the parietal layer, which lines the walls of the cavities. And then we have the visceral layer, which covers and adheres to the viscera within the cavities. Serous fluid is going to be between the two layers to reduce friction and allow the viscera to slide somewhat during movement. The serous membranes will include the pleura, pericardium, and the peritoneum. The pleura will surround the lungs, with the visceral pleural clinging to the surface of the lungs and the parietal lining the chest wall itself. Excuse me. The serous membrane of the pericardial cavity is called the pericardium, and the visceral pericardium covers the heart, and the parietal pericardium lines the heart wall or the chest wall. The peritoneum is the serous membrane of the abdominal cavity, with the visceral peritoneum covering the abdominal viscera and the parietal lining the abdominal wall. And some of our organs are known as retroperitoneal, and this is like our kidneys, and it means that they're located behind the parietal peritoneum. And here we have the last slide, which is the regions and quadrants of the abdominopelvic area. So we have what's called a quadrant plan, and we have a 9-region plan. Sorry, I've lost my words for a second there. So in the 9-region plan, you're going to have on the right side the right hypochondriac region, the right lumbar region, and the right iliac region. And this is going to correspond a lot with the area of the body. And this is going to make a lot more sense once we get into our study of the body. But the reason we have these body regions and quadrants and why we have to know each of these regions, all those 9 regions, is because of the concept of cavity embalming. So as embalmers, we're going to have to disinfect the body cavities to prevent decomposition from setting in faster. So what we do is we go in with an aspirator, go to the belly button 2 inches to the left, 2 inches up, and we insert a trocar. And we have to suction out all of the liquids in that area. Otherwise, the body's going to break down a lot faster. So you have to know the location of a lot of these things. And actually, where we insert the trocar is significant because we have to go in on the left side of this umbilical region. Otherwise, it could get entangled with the liver that's going to be here. And then we have to know the quadrant regions or the quadrant plan because the first discoloration that's going to occur is going to be in the lower right quadrant, which is where the cecum is located. That's because a lot of that compact waste is in that area. So that is the end of the lesson for today. I'm going to do a separate video for topographical anatomy where we talk about the 3 areas of embalming, or the 3 triangles and spaces that we use for our major selections of vessels. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, and I hope you all have a great week. Right, bye.